Welcome to our module on recruitment and selection. Recruitment is separate from selection. What do I mean by that? Well, there's two phases really to getting the employees that you need and want for your company. One of them is recruitment. That's getting the best people you possibly can to apply for the job. The next piece is selection. From those people who've applied for the job and are interested, how do you pick the ones that are going to do the best job for your company? And the selection process should be structured. We'll talk a little bit later in this module about structured behavioral job interviews. And without giving away the future, spoiler alert, most job interviews are not structured behavioral interviews, which means most job interviews really aren't a very good predictor of how successful a candidate will be. Well, here's a little bit of tales from the trenches, right? Things that I've learned over the years. First point is sales funnel. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about how you're selling a product, you have a lot of people at the top of the funnel, right? So you send out 100 resumes. For those 100 resumes, you're going to get maybe 20 interviews. And for 20 interviews, you're going to get 5 second interviews. And out of those 5 second interviews, you're going to get one job offer. And it's a funnel. As you move through the process, there are fewer and fewer opportunities for you. But the key takeaway from this is if you don't fill the top of the funnel, you won't get anything out the bottom. And as I said just a few moments ago, most interviews are not structured, which means, quite frankly, there's an excellent opportunity to game the system. And the way to do that is, first and foremost, to be yourself. I really believe that people can tell when you're trying to be something you're not. You want to be the best version of yourself, the most polite, most capable, but you got to be yourself. Don't try to be something you're not. In my experience, both as a hiring person and as a job candidate, I think the most valuable phrases are versions of I want the job, and I think I can do a good job for you. I hope I get the chance to prove it. Right? Offering somebody a job is kind of like asking them out. You're certainly more likely to ask out somebody you think will say yes. Here's maybe the best one that I've ever heard, and this is a true story from back when I was a co-op student. One of my friends who was definitely underqualified for the job at IBM, in his job interview said, my dad owns a business, and he's got two kinds of employees. Ones who just want to get paid and ones who want to help. I want to help. There are some things you can't ask in an interview. You can't ask somebody how old they are, if they're planning on having children, if they're sick, if they're a Canadian citizen. But there are things you can ask that are similar but directly related to the job. You can ask if you're entitled to work in Canada. Instead of asking someone if they're sick or have a disability, you can state the requirements of the job. For example, a courier driver, in the job description or in the job requirements, they require lifting 20 kilograms repeatedly throughout the day. Now, when we're on the hiring side of the table, the number one most important thing is to use structured interviews, and more specifically, structured behavioral interviews. We'll talk about those more later, and you're going to get a chance to practice those in an assignment. And don't let recruitment win over selection. Understand that there's a point at which you're trying to get people interested in the job and get them to apply, and then you have to change hats and move over to being selective about who you hire. For a structured interview, every candidate has to be asked the same questions. Most organizations stop there, and that's not enough. It's very common for an organization to ask every candidate the same questions, but they lack the next bit, which is critical, and that is every question must have a detailed scoring system. There needs to be an understanding amongst the interview team of what constitutes a good answer. This is very important because if we leave it up to the individuals and there's no detailed scoring system, as the day progresses and the interviews drag on, what an individual on the interview panel considers a good answer is going to change. They're going to be influenced by what they've heard before. They're going to be influenced by what they're thinking about, whether they're hungry. You have to have a scoring system, or you might as well not even do this. The scoring system should be detailed enough that anyone off the street should be able to administer the interview. So everybody's asked the same question. We have a scoring system. Well, what sort of questions should we ask? We should ask behavioral questions. We're not exactly sure why, but they're the effective ones. And by behavioral questions, I mean describe how you would or how you did behave in a situation like this. Makes a lot of sense because what we're really looking for is people who will, when in the job, behave the way we want them to. Classic interview questions often talk about motivation, values, goals. Turns out they're not very good questions at all. They have almost no predictive value. They're essentially no better than flipping a coin. And if we stop to think about it, this makes a lot of sense. I really don't care as an employer why my employee wants to do a good job or why my employee does a good job. I just care that they do a good job. So the interview questions should be specific. They should be related to the behavior of successful employees. The score sheet options need to range from unacceptable to great. And the score sheet options need to cover all likely answers. Because if you have an answer that doesn't fit in your score sheet, your people administering the interview aren't going to know how to score it. And here's one that's a little interesting. Historical questions are better than hypothetical. What do I mean by that? Well, tell me about a time when you dealt with an angry customer is a much better question than imagine an angry customer comes in and they're complaining about, we have no idea why this is true. It's suspected that historical questions engage the brain differently and we get more honest answers. We don't know, and we frankly don't have a good way to tell why they're better, but it's clearly established that they are better. And here's an example that I just talked about. Here's an example of a very simple grading scheme. And this is the sort of grading scheme, the level of detail that I want for your exercise. Does the right answer depend on the job? I'm pretty sure it does. If you ask the question, tell me about a time you and your friends got in trouble. Well, I want you to put on your imagination caps and think, what would be the best answer for a policeman, a teacher, a soldier, an accountant? Probably slightly different answers. One thing I haven't talked about here is the evaluation of technical knowledge. And the evaluation of technical knowledge, especially in our field, is very valid for an interview. So in your exercise, if in addition to a behavior question, you want to include a technical question, that's a good idea. And as a little anecdote, tales from the trenches, if you will, around the turn of the century, I had an interview or several interviews with Microsoft. And I think all the interviewers had decided on what the technical question would be. And the question was, what's the difference between a process and a thread? I don't know if they had a grading system for it, but looking back, it was a pretty good technical question for the job I was applying for. Another example, I applied for a job at a startup company that made some compiler tech that was good at parallelizing things and having the code then run on a GPU. Their technical question was to go to the whiteboard and solve a specific programming problem. And as I recall, the programming problem was you have a doubly linked list of items. Remove all the items from the list that have a value less than 5. So in each case, not huge technical questions, but questions that have been picked very carefully to be both generic so that most people should know them, but non-trivial so that you can see the level of understanding and depth that the candidate has. Now it's time for you to write some interview questions. Good luck. We look forward to seeing them. Thank you.